How's married life treating you guys?
Oh my god, it is so much fun. You know, marrying your best mate is just, it's the best. It's the best.
Yeah,
People always say you should marry your best friend.
it's true. It's the best advice, yeah. We feel like we're on like a play date forever.
Nicola's father is Nelson Peltz. You can even see Brooklyn in a picture here in the Google search. And Nicola and Elon Musk. He's worth $1.6 billion.
Nicola Peltz is reportedly getting $1 million a month from her dad, Nelson Peltz, which sounds like a ton of money, but remember, her dad is a billionaire. So how much does $1 million a month?
What if I told you this is not just a celebrity family argument, but a silent power shift happening right in front of the world? What if Brooklyn Beckham didn't simply fall out with his parents, but slowly stepped into a completely different empire? Because behind the smiling Instagram photos, luxury weddings, and picture-perfect interviews, something much bigger has been unfolding. Something nobody noticed at first. A wedding dance, a social media post, a legal notice, and a billionaire father who never says a word, but somehow stays at the center of it all. For years, the Beckhams looked untouchable. The definition of legacy, loyalty, and image. Then suddenly, Brooklyn does the unthinkable, publicly stands against his own family and cuts communication to the point where lawyers get involved. And the question nobody can stop asking is this: did Brooklyn choose love, or did he unknowingly walk into a power structure far bigger than he realized? Because this isn't gossip anymore. This is about influence, control, identity, and the quiet tension between two of the most powerful families in the world. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The strange part is, nothing about this exploded overnight. There was no screaming match caught on camera. No tabloid photo of a public fight. No viral video of anyone losing their temper. On the surface, everything still looked polished, controlled, perfect. And that's exactly why this story is so unsettling. Because when things fall apart this quietly, it usually means something much deeper has been shifting for a very long time. For years, Brooklyn Beckham was seen as the golden extension of the Beckham legacy. The eldest son. The one expected to carry forward not just the name, but the image, the discipline, the brand. From football fields to fashion campaigns, from red carpets to luxury events, he grew up inside a world where every move mattered and every appearance was part of a bigger picture. But somewhere along the way, that picture started to blur. First, it was the career switches. Photography, then cooking, then lifestyle branding, then something else. Each new direction looked exciting at first, but never quite settled into anything solid. To the public, it seemed like experimentation. To insiders, it started to look like uncertainty. And uncertainty is something powerful families notice very quickly. Then came Nicola. At first, the relationship looked like a fairy tale collision of two famous worlds. A Hollywood actress from a billionaire family meets the son of global icons. Lavish vacations, magazine covers, engagement headlines. A wedding so grand it felt like a royal event. Everything looked bigger, louder, more luxurious than anything Brooklyn had been part of before. And that's when subtle whispers began. Not in the press, not online, but in private circles close to both families. Because while the world saw romance, people close to the situation started noticing a shift in Brooklyn himself. He was spending less time in London, more time inside the Peltz circle, fewer appearances with his parents, more presence with Nicola's family. The change wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, almost invisible, but it was consistent. And consistency is what makes patterns impossible to ignore. Then came the wedding. What should have been a moment of unity between two powerful families somehow became the moment people now look back on as the beginning of everything unraveling. The first dance. It sounds harmless, small, insignificant. But according to multiple accounts, that moment carried more emotion than anyone expected. Brooklyn later described feeling embarrassed. Nicola reportedly left the room in tears. Guests felt the atmosphere in the room change instantly, like something invisible had just cracked. It wasn't about music. It wasn't about timing. It was about space, respect, presence. A moment that should have symbolized togetherness quietly planted the seed of division. And from that night onward, things were never quite the same. Communication between Brooklyn and his parents reportedly became strained. Conversations that used to be casual turned formal. Invitations were declined. Family events were missed. What once looked like normal distance between a married son and his parents started looking like deliberate separation. Then came the moment nobody expected. Brooklyn went public. In a long, emotional message, He accused his parents of misrepresenting the truth, prioritizing their brand over family, and disrespecting his wife. He made it clear he was standing with Nicola and that peace was no longer the goal. For the first time, a Beckham family issue wasn't being handled behind closed doors. It was on display for the world. And that's when things escalated from emotional to legal. Reports surfaced that Brooklyn had allegedly asked for all communication to go through legal channels. A cease and desist. Lawyers instead of phone calls. Paperwork instead of conversation. For David and Victoria, this wasn't just painful. It was shocking. Because this didn't feel like the son they knew. Insiders say they believed something else was influencing the situation. Not aggressively, not openly, but quietly, strategically. And that's where Nicola's father enters the conversation without ever saying a single word publicly. Nelson Peltz, a billionaire investor known for control, structure, and precision. A man whose world runs on leverage, not emotion. Someone who rarely speaks, but when he does, it carries weight. According to those close to the situation, Nelson was never fully convinced by Brooklyn's scattered career path. No public criticism. No rude comments. Just a silent assessment that Brooklyn lacked direction. And when someone like Nelson forms an opinion like that, it doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. Before the wedding, a strict prenuptial agreement was signed. The terms were clear. If the marriage ever ended, Brooklyn would not walk away with any part of the Peltz fortune. Only what he and Nicola built together. On paper, that's standard protection for a billionaire family. But to outsiders watching this drama unfold, it started looking like something more symbolic than financial. Because slowly, Brooklyn's entire world seemed to shift toward the Peltz side. Socially, emotionally, geographically. He didn't bring Nicola into the Beckham world. He stepped into hers. And that subtle difference is what has people talking the most. Because while Brooklyn insists he is finally free, finally speaking his truth, finally living without control, observers can't ignore how completely his environment has changed. New circle. New power center. New structure. Meanwhile, the rest of the Beckham family continues moving together. Public appearances. Family celebrations. Siblings staying close. The brand running smoothly. Except for one missing piece. Brooklyn. And now, people who knew him long before any of this are starting to speak. A former youth football coach described a childhood filled with pressure, constant security, and little sense of normal freedom. He didn't blame anyone. He didn't take sides. But he painted a picture of a young boy who grew up surrounded by protection, expectation, and image. A child raised inside a brand. And children raised inside brands often grow into adults searching for something that feels real, independent, and entirely their own. Which makes this entire situation even more complex. Because maybe this isn't just about Nicola. Or Nelson. Or David and Victoria. Maybe this is about Brooklyn trying to escape a system he felt trapped in, only to unknowingly enter another one that operates very differently, but just as powerfully. And that's where the real discomfort lies. Not in who's right or wrong, but in the possibility that Brooklyn believes he's stepping into freedom, while everyone else sees him stepping into another form of control. And the longer this silence between the families continues, the louder that question becomes. And this is where the story stops being emotional and starts looking strategic. Because when you zoom out and stop looking at the feelings, the tears, the Instagram captions, and the wedding memories, a completely different pattern starts to appear. A pattern that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with power structures. Brooklyn says he finally feels independent, finally free, finally able to make his own choices without pressure from his parents' legacy. But the uncomfortable question people keep whispering is this: if this is freedom, why does it look so structured? Why does every move now seem to orbit around one household, one circle, one center of gravity? The Peltz world. He's not floating freely. He's anchored. Deeply. And when someone becomes emotionally, socially, and geographically anchored to one powerful family, the influence doesn't have to be loud to be effective. It becomes environmental. Those close to elite circles say influence at this level is never obvious. Nobody gives orders. Nobody raises their voice. Nobody forces anything. The control comes from comfort, access, opportunity, belonging. You don't feel directed. You feel supported. And that's what makes it so hard to see. People began noticing that Brooklyn's voice in interviews changed subtly. The way he spoke about his past. The way he described his upbringing. The distance in his tone when mentioning his parents. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was detached, like someone describing a life they no longer felt part of. Meanwhile, Nicola remained calm, composed, and completely steady in the spotlight. No public back and forth. No emotional posts. No drama. Which, strangely, made the situation feel even more intense. Because while Brooklyn was speaking loudly, the Peltz side was speaking through silence. And silence, in high-power families, is often the loudest message. Then people started connecting another dot that had been sitting in plain sight. Brooklyn's lifestyle after the wedding didn't just change socially. It changed in scale. The homes, the travel, the circle, the way events were hosted, the level of privacy. The shift wasn't small. It was dramatic. Even for someone raised as a Beckham, the Peltz world operates at a different financial altitude. And that creates an invisible psychological shift. Because when you step into a space where the wealth, structure, and influence are greater than what you grew up with, your sense of grounding changes. Your reference point changes. Your idea of normal changes. Suddenly, the life you came from starts to feel smaller, more distant, less relevant. Not because it was bad, but because you're now standing somewhere else entirely. That's why some insiders say this situation isn't a rebellion. It's a relocation. Brooklyn didn't fight his parents and walk away into independence. He walked directly into another system that was already fully built, fully powerful, and fully stable without him. And that's where the imbalance shows. Because Nicola didn't leave her world. She stayed inside it. Brooklyn left his. And when only one person relocates their entire emotional world, the power dynamic naturally shifts without anyone needing to discuss it. This is what people close to David and Victoria reportedly find hardest to process. Not that Brooklyn married Nicola, but that he seems to have erased his previous environment entirely in the process. Calls stopped. Visits stopped. Casual moments disappeared. Everything became formal, filtered, scheduled, legal. When lawyers start replacing conversations in a family, the emotional bridge is already burned. And then came the detail that made many observers deeply uncomfortable. The prenuptial agreement. Again, on paper, this is normal for billionaire families. Protection of assets. Legal clarity. Nothing unusual. But in the context of everything happening, it started to feel symbolic. Because if this marriage ever ended, Brooklyn wouldn't just lose a relationship. He would lose his entire new environment. The home. The circle. The lifestyle. The structure he now lives inside. And after cutting off his parents, there would be nowhere emotionally familiar to return to without rebuilding everything from scratch. That's what reportedly keeps David and Victoria awake at night. Not anger. Not pride. Fear. Fear that their son has placed his entire future inside a world that he doesn't control, doesn't own, and can't fall back from easily. Meanwhile, Nelson Peltz remains silent. No statements. No interviews. No defense. No clarification. But those who know his reputation describe him as someone who evaluates people based on direction, discipline, and results. And Brooklyn's constantly shifting career path, photography, cooking, branding, experimenting, reportedly doesn't align with the kind of structure Nelson respects. Not because Brooklyn lacks talent, but because he lacks a fixed direction. And for a man like Nelson, unpredictability is a weakness. So now imagine the psychological weight of that. Living inside a household where the quiet opinion of a billionaire father-in-law might be that you still haven't figured yourself out. You're not attacked. You're not criticized. You're simply assessed. And that kind of silent judgment can be more powerful than open conflict. At the same time, Brooklyn publicly insists that Nicola is not controlling him. That he is making his own choices. That this is his decision. And that may very well be true. But influence doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like comfort. Sometimes it looks like protection. Sometimes it looks like belonging to something bigger than yourself. And that's why this story has people so divided. Because depending on how you see it, Brooklyn is either a man finally escaping a controlled childhood and choosing his own path, or a man who escaped one powerful system and quietly stepped into another without realizing it. And the most revealing part? His siblings. They continue appearing with David and Victoria. They continue balancing their own careers, their own lives, while maintaining family ties. They didn't feel the need to publicly cut off or legally separate. Which raises a difficult question many are afraid to say out loud. If the Beckham household was truly as controlling as Brooklyn describes, why is he the only one who walked away this completely? That question doesn't accuse anyone. But it does make the situation more complicated than a simple family argument. Because this doesn't look like a shared experience. It looks personal, specific, unique to Brooklyn. And when a situation becomes that unique, people start looking at the emotional and psychological layers, not just the surface drama. What if this isn't about Nicola versus Victoria? What if this is about Brooklyn searching for an identity outside the shadow of his parents, and finding it inside the shadow of a different empire? That's the possibility that makes this story so uncomfortable to watch. Because no one here looks like a villain. And yet, everyone looks trapped in a situation that keeps getting harder to untangle. And now the story reaches the point where emotions don't explain anything anymore. Because when a family rift lasts this long, stays this quiet, and becomes this formal, it stops being about who said what, or who hurt who. It becomes about what has already changed permanently. Time, distance, and pride. Brooklyn says he has no regrets. He believes he finally spoke his truth. He believes he stepped away from a system that made him feel controlled and into a life that feels authentic and supportive. David and Victoria, according to those close to them, say the door is still open. No conditions. No demands. No public apology required. Just a hope that one day their son will call. But hope and reality don't always live in the same place. Because even if Brooklyn woke up tomorrow and decided he wanted to reconnect, the path back isn't emotional anymore. It's structural. Too much has been said publicly. Too many lines have been crossed. Lawyers have already been involved. Narratives have been created that can't simply be erased with a phone call and a hug. Reconciliation now would require something far more difficult than forgiveness. It would require everyone to admit they might have been wrong. And in families this powerful, that is incredibly rare. Then there's the question nobody asks loudly, but everyone thinks quietly. Would Nicola even support that reunion? Not because she's against it, but because reopening that door would reopen tension she has clearly chosen to stay away from. She has reportedly avoided events where David and Victoria might be present. She has kept her distance, protected her peace, and built her world without needing their involvement. From her perspective, stepping back into that dynamic might feel like stepping back into discomfort. And then there's the biggest silent factor of all. Nelson Peltz. A man who has watched this entire situation unfold without saying a word publicly. A man whose influence is never obvious, never loud, but always present in the background. Would he see value in Brooklyn reconnecting with the Beckham world? Or would he see it as reopening instability, drama, and emotional distraction inside his daughter's life? Because at this level, decisions aren't just emotional. They are strategic. People in elite circles reportedly view cutting off family not as independence, but as unpredictability. It raises questions about judgment, loyalty, and emotional stability. And that perception matters, especially when your reputation is tied to powerful investors, business networks, and long-term influence. That's why this situation feels so heavy. Because Brooklyn isn't just choosing between parents and wife. He's choosing between two entire systems that operate on completely different values. The Beckham system is built on legacy, loyalty, and endurance. The Peltz system is built on leverage, structure, and control. Both powerful, both successful, both stable, but completely different in how they operate. And Brooklyn is standing right in the middle of that contrast. The longer this silence continues, the more permanent it starts to feel. This doesn't follow the usual celebrity family feud pattern. There hasn't been a big emotional reunion. No public reconciliation photo. No soft interviews hinting at progress. Just distance. And distance has a way of turning temporary decisions into permanent realities. Meanwhile, Brooklyn's life keeps moving inside the Peltz environment. His interviews, his lifestyle, his daily routine, his social world. Everything now exists within that structure. The world he came from starts to feel like a memory rather than a current reality. And memories are easier to disconnect from than living relationships. People from Brooklyn's past, including those who knew him before the fame and before the marriage, describe him as someone who always carried pressure quietly. A child raised inside security, image, and expectation. Someone who never fully experienced a normal sense of freedom. Which makes this entire story even more layered. Because maybe, in his mind, this isn't about choosing one family over another. Maybe this is about choosing the first environment where he feels like he can breathe. But when that environment is backed by billionaire power, structure, and quiet evaluation, the question becomes unavoidable. Is this freedom, or just a different kind of framework? And that's the part that makes observers uneasy. Not because anyone is evil. Not because anyone is lying. But because influence at this level doesn't require force. It requires presence. And presence is exactly what the Peltz world provides for Brooklyn right now. So what happens next? Does time soften things? Or does time make the gap so wide that returning becomes impossible? Does Brooklyn ever feel the pull of where he came from strongly enough to reopen that door? And if he does, will that door still be emotionally safe to walk through? Because the longer pride, silence, and distance sit between people, the harder it becomes to remember what it felt like before any of this happened. Right now, two worlds continue moving forward separately. The Beckham family, united, public, and steady. Brooklyn, Nicola, and the Peltz circle, private, structured, and distant. No shouting, no chaos, no headlines every day. Just a quiet standoff that says more than any public fight ever could. And maybe that's what makes this story so fascinating to watch. It's not explosive on the outside. It's unsettling on the inside. Because this isn't about drama. It's about how power, love, identity, and loyalty can slowly reshape a person's entire world without anyone noticing until it's already too late to reverse. And the biggest question still hangs in the air, unanswered. Did Brooklyn Beckham walk away from control? Or did he simply step into a new version of it that feels different enough to call it freedom? Before you make up your mind about this story, pause for a second. Because this isn't a simple who's right, who's wrong situation. This is about power, influence, identity, and how quietly a person's entire world can change without anyone realizing it until the distance becomes impossible to ignore. Do you think Brooklyn finally broke free from a life of pressure and expectation? Or do you think he stepped into a different system that feels like freedom, but comes with its own kind of structure? Was this really about a wedding moment, hurt feelings, and family misunderstandings? Or was that just the spark that exposed a much deeper shift happening behind the scenes? And the biggest question of all, if Brooklyn ever wanted to go back emotionally, not publicly, would that even be possible anymore? I want to know what you think. Drop your opinion in the comments. No filters, no sides. Just your honest take on this silent showdown between legacy and power. If you enjoy deep dives that go beyond gossip and actually break down the psychology, influence, and hidden layers behind celebrity stories, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because stories like this, they are happening all the time, quietly, strategically, and right in front of us. And trust me, you don't want to miss the next one.